Rachel Vega's name once lit up Hollywood. Now it leaves seasoned cops shaking as her final horrifying performance turns a forgotten actress into a true crime legend no one will ever erase. Rachel Vega had always believed she was born for the spotlight. From the moment she stepped onto a set, people noticed her. Directors praised her charisma, fans loved her smile, and producers predicted a bright future ahead. Rachel landed a breakout role in a teen drama that became a short-lived sensation, splashing her face across tabloids and gossip columns. But fame is a fragile thing in Hollywood, and soon her luck began to turn. The next few films flopped at the box office, and critics shredded her performances. Rumors spread that she was difficult to work with, showing up late to sets and arguing with directors. Now, some claimed she was drinking too much. Others whispered about pills. Rachel tried to fight back, auditioning for parts she thought could save her, but the industry had already moved on. In the place of love and adoration, Otto found only rejection. Paparazzi caught her stumbling out of nightclubs, tears mixing with her smeared lipstick. Her once flawless reputation crumbled under scandal after scandal, as casting agents quietly removed her name from their lists, and friends stopped calling. In just 2 years, Rachel went from rising star to a cautionary tale of Hollywood's unforgiving nature. Finally, she gave up trying to revive her career. She retreated from the world, disappearing into a small house in a rundown corner of Burbank. Neighbors saw her less and less, and when they did, they barely recognized her. Rachel had lost weight. Her hair was tangled and dull, and she always looked tired. She stopped maintaining the yard, and junk piled up around her porch. The glamorous girl who once glowed in the limelight was gone, replaced by a ghost of her former self. For a while, no one seemed to care. The world had moved on to new faces, new stories, and new controversies. But Rachel stayed trapped in a faded dream, surrounded by old movie posters and trophies she refused to throw away. People who passed by her house sometimes heard strange noises at night, loud crashes, or the echo of her voice, shouting lines from old scripts. A neighbor once thought about calling for help, but decided it wasn't their problem. In Hollywood, broken dreams were everywhere. And Rachel's fall seemed like just another sad story among countless others. The truth was much darker than anyone imagined. Rachel had become obsessed with rewriting her own story, determined to create a world where she was still adored and powerful. She scribbled letters to big producers, begging them to give her another chance, but never mailed them. She practiced old monologues for hours, alone in her dusty living room, pretending to stand before cheering fans. Day after day, she lost herself deeper in a fantasy, convinced that if she just believed hard enough, she could turn back time. The phone hardly ever rang, and bills went unpaid. Rachel slipped further out of reality, her world shrinking to the walls of that house and the memories trapped inside it. It was only a matter of time before something inside her finally snapped. But no one could have predicted just how horrifying Rachel's last performance would be, or how badly it would scar everyone who came to witness the tragic final act of a failed Hollywood star. The complaint started as a simple nuisance. Neighbors had noticed a terrible rotting stench drifting from Rachel Vega's house, growing stronger every day. At first, they thought it was just trash piled up or maybe a dead animal somewhere on the property. But as days passed and the smell became impossible to ignore, they decided to call the police. When officers arrived, they could see right away that something was very wrong. The yard was overgrown with weeds. Garbage bags were split open along the walkway, and the mailbox overflowed with months of unopened letters. The house looked abandoned, a forgotten relic of a faded dream. Stepping inside, the officers were hit with a wave of decay so strong they almost turned back. The air was thick, humid, and filled with a chemical Thames that made their eyes burn. The floor was littered with empty food containers and crusted plates stacked high on every available surface. Rotten leftovers had drawn swarms of insects, there, buzzing, echoing in the silence. The wallpaper was peeling, and large water stains marked the ceiling where leaks had gone unfixed. Rachel's world was crumbling, and the house had decayed along with her. What truly disturbed the police, though, were the walls. They were covered in Rachel's movie posters from her early days, but every single one had been violently defaced. Her face was scratched out with deep gouges, and hateful words were scrawled over the titles in red marker. In one corner, a pile of handwritten letters lay scattered, pages torn and wrinkled. The letters were addressed to Hollywood producers, directors, and casting agents pleading for another chance. Some were hopeful, written in neat, desperate handwriting, while others were angry and filled with threats of revenge. None of them had ever been mailed. The deeper the officers walked, the stranger everything became. Family photos were smashed and thrown in a heap near the stairs. Broken glass crunched under their boots as they moved from room to room. It was as if Rachel had tried to erase her entire past, piece by piece. They found piles of clothing shredded with scissors, costumes from her old films that she had once proudly displayed now torn to ribbons in the living room. The police found a mannequin dressed in a glamorous costume from Rachel's biggest movie role. Its head had been removed, and the costume was smeared with something dark and dried. Around it, half-melted candles formed a circle, wax pooled on the dirty carpet. The officers tried to make sense of the bizarre shrine, but couldn't. They felt a growing unease that something far worse was waiting for them in that house. Every room seemed to hold another layer of Rachel's broken mind. Her obsession was everywhere, twisting what had once been a home into a haunted theater of her own nightmares. As the officers pushed forward, their radios crackled with static, adding to the eerie tension. The smell grew even stronger as they approached a locked door at the back of the house. What lay behind it, they would soon discover, was far more horrifying than any of them could have imagined. A grotesque final act no one had ever prepared to see. The locked door at the back of Rachel Vega's house refused to budge at first. The officers had to force it open, their boots crashing through the warped wood. What waited on the other side stole the breath from their lungs. The room felt like an abandoned theater, but the scene on display was more nightmarish than any horror script. A heavy darkness clung to every corner, the smell of rot even thicker here. It's almost impossible to bear. In the center of the room sat Rachel herself, tied to a wooden chair with strips of movie reel tape, as if she had directed her own tragic finale. Her once elegant evening gown was stained dark red, the fabric sticking to her cold, lifeless skin. The thin slices across her wrists showed how she had died, but it was the mask on her face that made hardened officers shiver in terror. She had cut a smiling photograph of her younger, glamorous self and taped it crudely over her face, transforming her death into a sick performance. A shattered mirror leaned against the far wall, reflecting the grotesque sight over and over. Each broken shard multiplied Rachel's lifeless body in distorted pieces like a macabre movie reel on repeat. It was impossible to look away from the horror of it. In one limp hand, Rachel still clutched a child's toy microphone, the plastic cracked and worn from countless rehearsals. Around her, the walls were lined with torn pages of movie scripts pinned like wallpaper. Whole scenes had been rewritten in Rachel's messy handwriting, placing the original characters with her own name over and over, as if she could force the world to give her the starring role one last time. The candles surrounding her were burned down to nothing, their wax stuck to the filthy carpet in pale lumps. It looked like she had performed countless final acts in front of them, again and again, till the fantasy devoured her completely. The police tried to steady themselves as they approached, but even the most experienced officers felt panic clawing at their chests. Rachel's body was rigid and twisted in the chair, her head slumped to the side beneath the paper mask. The toy microphone pointed up to her mouth like she'd been waiting for applause that would never come. Every detail of the scene felt planned, as if Rachel had written her own final script and insisted the world watch it play out. No one could understand how far she had fallen, or how her mind had collapsed under the weight of dreams that never came true. Some officers fought back tears, unable to process how someone who once lit up a movie screen could be reduced to a puppet of her own madness. The mannequin in the next room, headless and dressed in her movie costume, seemed to watch the terrible stage, frozen in silent witness. The flickering police flashlights made the scene even more eerie, casting Rachel's distorted shadow across the walls. There was no applause, no audience, no happy ending. Only Rachel, alone in her nightmare, lost in a fantasy that had destroyed her completely. As investigators began to sift through the horror of Rachel Vega's final performance, they discovered the true depth of her unraveling. The house was a monument to her delusions, a prison built from shredded scripts and burned-out dreams. Officers gathered the piles of letters Rachel had written, each one a frantic plea or a furious rant. She had rewritten her own history on every scrap of paper she could find, demanding roles she was never offered and raging at people who had long forgotten her name. Among the chaos, detectives uncovered an old handheld camcorder covered in dust. When they played back the tapes, their horror only deepened. Rachel had spent hours recording herself in monologues that blurred reality and fantasy beyond recognition. Sometimes she pretended to be accepting awards in front of a cheering crowd. Other times she screamed at imaginary casting directors, accusing them of destroying her life. On one tape, her voice dropped to a chilling whisper as she claimed to have killed a rival actress who had stolen her role. The details were so vivid, the detectives had to open an investigation to see if Rachel had actually committed a murder. But no evidence ever surfaced, and no missing person matched her story. The confession was nothing but a twisted performance, another piece of her fractured mind. One recording showed Rachel setting up the mannequin in its costume, carefully arranging it under the candlelight. She spoke to it as though it were a director, giving her final notes. With a trembling voice, she rehearsed again and again how she would end her life, adjusting the props, rewriting her lines. It was clear she had planned everything, from the movie reel tape to the cutout photograph mask she would wear. She wanted to leave the world with one last unforgettable scene, no matter how horrifying it might be. Officers watching the footage struggled to hold themselves together. It was painful to see how desperately Rachel clung to her lost fame, acting out parts that no longer existed except in her mind. Her voice shifted from triumphant to terrified, sometimes in the same breath. At moments she broke down, sobbing, that she wasn't good enough, that no one would ever love her again. Then she would pull herself together, smiling wide as she started the monologue from the beginning. Determined to deliver it perfectly, detectives realized the entire house had become a theater. Every room a twisted stage where Rachel performed, the same nightmare over and over. She had rewritten her identity so many times she could no longer separate who she really was from the characters she used to play. No script could have captured a tragedy like this, where a failed starlet invented a world so convincing it destroyed her completely. The officers boxed up the evidence, the letters, the tapes, the photos, but even after they left, they felt like Rachel's story still clung to them. It was impossible to forget the raw pain of her delusions, or the haunting way she tried to control her own ending. The cameras had stopped rolling long ago, but Rachel never let go of the spotlight, even if it meant creating her final masterpiece. Out of her own death, Rachel Vega had dreamed of being unforgettable, and in a grim, twisted way, she achieved it. The investigators who stepped into her decaying home would carry the images with them for the rest of their lives. Even after the body was removed, they could not escape the memory of Rachel sitting in that chair, her face hidden behind a smiling paper mask, her hands still gripping a child's toy microphone. Some of the officers struggled to sleep, replaying the scene in their nightmares. The crime scene cleanup crew had to request counseling, unable to shake the smell, the chaos, and the sense of complete, suffocating madness left behind. In the days that followed, news of Rachel's death swept through Los Angeles like wildfire. Her name, which had once been printed on red carpet invitations and film credits, was now splashed across headlines in the worst way imaginable. Reporters called it a tragic ending, a fallen star who could not bear to fade away. But the truth was far darker than the public ever knew. The police had seen firsthand the depth of Rachel's obsession, the shredded scripts, the blood-soaked dress, the monologues recorded again and again until her voice cracked. They knew she had staged her death with the same precision she once brought to her acting roles, a final scene meant to force everyone to watch her one last time. People online quickly turned her story into a viral true crime sensation. Amateur detectives combed through her old interviews, searching for clues of the breakdown to come. Fans rewatched her early movies, hunting for signs that Rachel had been unraveling even back then. Her face was shared in tribute posts and gruesome memes alike. In death, Rachel had become the most talked about actress in Hollywood once more, but for reasons she never could have wanted. The officers involved in the case could not shake the sense of being part of something unreal, like stepping into a film where the horror was too strange to believe. Some described how they felt watched, even weeks later, as if Rachel's final performance had reached out from the grave to haunt them. One investigator admitted he could not look at old movie posters without seeing her defaced face scratched through with rage. Another stopped going to the cinema altogether, afraid the darkness inside Rachel might live on in every story projected on a big screen. Rachel's house was eventually cleaned out, stripped bare of its grotesque memorabilia. But neighbors still avoided walking past it. Even with fresh paint and new owners, the place felt poisoned, forever stained by what had happened inside. It stood as a quiet warning about the price of a dream gone wrong. A dream that had destroyed not just Rachel, but left a scar on every person who came to witness it. Rachel Vega had once wanted to be the heroine in every story. In the end, she got what she wished for. She became unforgettable. But it was not the applause she had longed for. Only the horror of a woman who had written herself into a final role too terrifying for anyone to ever forget.